I've been waiting for this time for hours now because we have a great show for you today and a topic that is highly relevant. When I said pay attention to your financial well-being as an emerging leader, really that's a topic that is good for just about everybody I've met, including if I need to look in the mirror for myself. We need to have true moments of honesty in order to be able to make sure that we are well aligned financially. So today I'm happy to welcome Sean Britton. He is also a fellow paramedic, but more importantly, a financial advisor today. We had a really good one-to-one chat, and you can find his video talking about his journey to becoming a financial advisor and how he made these decisions along the way in our YouTube channel at thedutchmentor.com or in our video blog on our website at the dutchmentor.com. Again, today's goal is really for us to have a conversation about finances. And before I give you the mic, I will just quickly tell you my story on how I became more aware. And luckily, I grew up with a father, in Holland, who was a bit of a penny pincher, maybe. He made us keep budgets from the time we were 11, 12 years old. And was able, he was giving us money that we had to set aside for food, for entertainment, and for clothes. But when I came to America, when I was 18 years old by myself, I kind of lost track of that a little bit. And it was like, whatever cash you had in hand, you would have a tendency to spend. And it wasn't until many years later, probably in my early mid-20s, 25, 26 years old, I saw a paramedic, Vincent, sitting on the couch in the medic station, and he was reading Finance for Dummies. I said, well, I can certainly, identify myself as a dummy when it came down to finance and, probably many other areas. But it opened my eyes to saying, hey, is this something I should be concerned about? And he gave me a lesson right then and there about the power of compound interest, one, and two, about making sure that if you should contribute to a 401k or 403b, at minimum, the minimum amount that will be matched by your employer. And I'm really grateful for him having told me that story when I was 25, because had I waited 5 or 10 years, we all know that it would have cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars on the back end by having started very late. So again, the goal today is to have a conversation about finances for emerging leaders, for people hopefully in the early 20s, but it's never too late to start thinking about that. And we'll talk a little bit about debt services. We talk a little bit about programs. We talk a little bit about why you should not go on this journey by yourself. So that's kind of the introduction. And I hope that, the listeners now or in the future, as you come back to this, stick with this, because I can promise you, if you only take one thing away from this conversation that can help you establish a better routine, a better system of accountability around your finances, life will be better. If not now, it certainly will be better in retirement. So with that said, Sean, again, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, what your background is, and what you are doing today, and then we'll go into the conversation about wherever we want to start.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me, Walter. As Walter said, I am a clinical paramedic who still practices, but for over the past 10 years, I was a healthcare administrator in public health and hospital based systems. And within the past, a little over a year ago, I opened up my own financial planning practice called Stat Financial Health. And so I was able to obtain the licensing and the credentialing required in order to open that practice. And we've been in business now for a little over a year, and it's currently my full-time pursuit.
Excellent. So, from based on that, and thank you for explaining that. And really, the key here is that you don't sell anything. You don't trade anything. You are an advisor, which kind of gives you an ability to be in a neutral position, which is much warranted today. Anybody who sells something is often highly motivated by not what is in your best interest, but in the interest for their pocketbook. So again, you're in a unique situation. I think that's very valuable to potential customers and clients. Obviously, in our industry, there are, in healthcare or emergency services, there are high stressors. And the divorce rate is exceptionally high. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. Are you still there?
I'm here.
Oh, my computer went completely dead. So, see, even my computer doesn't like to talk about finances. So, um, so we're back on. I think everything looks okay, looks stable again. So, one of the things is that in our industry, the divorce rate is very high.
Mhm.
And then the first place you ask the question, why is that? And really, when you start digging deep, the first place that people want to go, well, we work so many hours, we see what we see, and that changes us as people. But I have learned over time that that is really not true. What happens is that people spend more than they have, and they end up in tremendous amount of debt. And there is no greater stressor on a relationship than financial stress. So, what is one thing that you would you can share with the audience on, when do you know that you're in trouble, that you need to start really paying attention to your spending habits in order to prevent that additional stressor which none of us need in life. So tell us a little bit about that. How do you make that diagnosis?
Well, I think when you talk about financial health, it's a spectrum, just like in clinical medicine. Someone can be acutely ill or chronically ill, or they can be at a neutral baseline, or they can be feeling really optimal well being. And really, where we want everyone to feel with their financial health is optimal well being. That's better, not
Yeah,
just the absence of disease, but actually feeling that they are doing well. And really, the root word I think in a lot of this is control. Having control over your finances that removes the uncertainty. Because I think in many cases, it's the uncertainty that brings about the stress because you feel that you don't have the ability to change the situation or work within the situation you're in. So, one of the things I would advise early on for people is to always start with their cash flow, their spending, and their savings. And really, the best method to start is to sit down and write a budget. And a lot of people don't really have a budget. They know they make money, they spend money, they kind of know what they spend on this or that. But there's a lot of mindless spending that occurs. And unless you're actively tracking what you're spending, you really don't know where the dollars are going. And I think that that can bring a lot of stress and uncertainty for people. So I would always recommend as the first step to create a budget.
yeah. So I think that's a very valid point. I would challenge by saying is that in reviewing your budget to see what comes in, what goes out. Many people have grown accustomed to spending money on their credit cards, and with the thought that I'll pay it off at the end of the month. And then when the end of the month comes and look in their bank account and look at the credit card balance, and there is no balance there. That there's no way to pay that off, so they kind of kick that can down the curb and they end up paying interest on it. And before you know it, the spending limits on those credit cards are set way too high for some, 5, 10, 15, 20, $30,000. And if you think about that, to pay over $30,000 credit card at 19%, and that's low, or 28%, it could take you a lifetime. Right. So, what would you advise that as you start looking at your budget itself and seeing what comes and goes? What is your advice to folks who have gotten themselves into problems with multiple credit cards on how to change their behavior that will help them get back on in a straight line or on budget, so to speak?
So the accompanying component to the budget would also be the balance sheet, which lists out your assets and your liabilities. And ultimately, that's going to give you your net worth. And so I think you can create a budget and you can track your budget over time, but to really measure the outcomes and the effectiveness of what you're doing, you have to see that your net worth is trending up, either in the form of more assets, less debt, or a combination of both. So with the budget, it's a tool to determine are your spending behaviors, and really that's what they are, their behaviors, are they aligned with what it is that you're trying to do, what you value, what you believe in, where you want to be. And from there, you're able to come up with a way to determine what's more discretionary, what can you cut, what can't you cut. And you can't change habits overnight. You can develop habits over time, but I always use the analogy New Year's comes and people sign up for the gym and they rush to the gym and they work out way too much and they get really sore and then they get discouraged and they don't want to do it anymore and they're right back to where they were. And so It's very similar to that. Little incremental changes over time, and you're not going to get rid of $30,000 worth of debt in the blink of an eye, but you can make meaningful progress over time.
Yeah, listen, if you can't replace blood if you don't stop the bleeding first,
Yep.
right? It can go in and so there's a question that pops up on from a viewer about an example of a budget, and I always say, listen, try to keep it simple, stupid, right? KISS. All it requires is just a piece of paper, and you put two columns on it. What comes in, what goes out, to see where you're standing. On the flip side, you can line up all of your debt versus all of your assets, and then be able to get a balance sheet to see where you're at on the end of the day. I use a simple Excel format. I have a quarterly behavior that I go online and I drop in all of my assets and drop in all my liabilities, and I'm looking at a trend line. And I believe in trend line management in any performance metric. I cannot react to 1 week or 1 month. It really is about what my behavior is over a period of time. But to stay on the topic of the credit card for a second, because that is something that is very, very sensitive to most people. Um, so paying high rates is almost like drowning slowly, right? It is extremely difficult to get out of it. What is your recommendation for folks to consolidate, to work with a company for consolidation, or to call the credit card directly and try to renegotiate the terms of the credit card, and maybe even go into a budget plan for that? As my computer once again is going out, hopefully it will come back just as quick. Sean, if you take it away and talk to me about it.
So I have to be honest that that's not something I've done a lot with clients. The clients I have, the credit card debt has been at a manageable level that they've paid it back through time and effort and consistency of payments. So I haven't worked directly with credit card companies or debt consolidation companies on negotiating that debt. It's certainly an option that's out there, probably having an impact on the credit score. I would probably be viewing that as something that would be if you're getting very close towards bankruptcy and you're trying to head off a complete bankruptcy action, that might be the point where you want to start making those calls and utilizing those services. Uh, but it really is a matter of where you are currently, where we're starting from, and kind of going back to why we want financial health. We want to avoid getting to the acute bleed. We want to avoid the hemorrhage in the first place because, yeah, we could do a massive transfusion right at the end and some really critical interventions, but we really want to try and head it off and keep people on the more positive trajectory, or hopefully the trouble they're in isn't too bad at this point.
Yeah, yeah, no, it was solid advice, and the reason why I bring it up because I've had too many examples around me of people who either went bankrupt or really have been drowning in credit card debt, and really cannot get ahead. And really, the key answer here is, you have to change your habits and behavior, because otherwise, if you don't, there is no end in sight for one, and you will end up bankrupt. And two, you should not do it on your own. There are services out there that you can knock on. And for example, most companies have an employee assistance program. Sometimes we think about this is only for mental health, but they also have services that they can provide financial counseling in order to be able to get you on solid grounds. So don't look at the benefits that are available to the companies you work with in order to be able to find that financial solvency. Because again, if the four pillars: mental wellness, spiritual wellness, physical wellness, relational wellness, the fifth one is financial wellness. If any of those pillars are unstable, it is very difficult to be highly effective in anything else that you do. So that is an important part of it. So let's go back to the budget, right? What is our greatest expense on the budget is housing. So what do you say? And because a lot of people, especially young people, as they start thinking about, how I want to no longer rent, I want to be able to own, right? How can people start saving money for a down payment? Or how can people start thinking about what ratio, what part of my salary can I afford to spend on a mortgage or rent for that matter, and still feel like I have a life to live and I'm not living for my mortgage?
So there are two general housing ratios that are used in order to provide some guidance. There's housing ratio one, and that is that you want your mortgage payment, including the taxes, the insurance, all the associated costs of the house, to be less than 28% of your gross income. So that's the first guidepost. The second guidepost is housing ratio two, which is if you add in all of your other debt payments, that in total with the house, they would be under 36% of your total income. Now, you can probably get financing above those two ratios, but it becomes riskier and you really start making lifestyle sacrifices at that point.
Yeah, because of that, of course, is when you start working with an less than 20% down on any house, that you have to start making PMI payments, which are essentially speaking penalty payments because of your financial insecurity and the risk that they take in giving you a loan. Of course, again, all these things take more money out of your pocket. And I don't envy. Listen, we didn't have it easy growing up, and buying a house, was already more than $100,000. And now today is $400,000 or $500,000, right? And especially people who work in the healthcare industry barely can afford to live in the communities that they work in, right? Especially with the EMDs and paramedics and starting nursing. Glad to see that their salaries are getting better. Certainly post COVID, they've gotten a little bump, but it's still a tough place to be. So now that we have a budget, we know what we can spend on mortgage. We know, but how much should I be saving? What percentage of my total budget should be going to my savings?
So, a general rule of thumb is if you start saving in your 20s, you can have a savings rate as low as 10 or 13%. It's going to go up considerably the longer you delay. As you made that point earlier about starting at age 25 and compounding. Another general rule of thumb using the 50-30-20 budget method would be that you want 20% of your income to go towards savings consistently. And that's a combination of retirement savings as well as your more short term savings.
Yeah, and then so if I'm I think I have. I'm a novice investor. Saw these people on the ticker tape making all kinds of investments into stocks and options. Often we are lying to ourselves, and I call this is nothing else but fancy, gambling, and that is a mistake that too many people have made and end up always on the losing end of the. So when we talk about savings, are you talking about putting things into a savings account at the local bank at 2%? Are you thinking about putting some money into CDs, or are you thinking about mutual funds or IRAs?
So your first step is you want to have an emergency fund of at least 3 to 6 months of your total expenses, and you want that to be fairly liquid. It could be as liquid as being in a savings account, hopefully a high yield savings account. That right now there are some where you can even get 4 or 5% interest. It could also be in the form of short duration treasury bills you get from treasurydirect.com, like 28-day treasury bills or 90-day. The other option could be a money market fund in a brokerage account. At this point, some of them are paying rates of about 4 or 5%. I'm not a big fan of CDs because I found that often the interest rates on the CDs have been lower than what you can get from more liquid options like a brokerage account or the short duration treasury bills. But something in that vein, something that it's cash if you need it. And I remember from our last conversation, something I took away that your father had shared with you was you don't necessarily need to have all your money in your hands within the next 6 hours. So if it's in a brokerage account or if it's in a treasury bill with a 28 day duration, you're not often going to have a lot of situations that you need to run and get that money in under 2 or 3 days or however long for it to still be pretty liquid.
Yeah, I think that the advice that my father gave a long time ago is actually a money saving technique, right? Is that we are very emotional people and we tend to be very reactive and we fall in love with things. And if we cannot buy it for 2, 3, 4, 5 days, often we will fall out of love with the idea and end up saving ourselves a headache into the future, of course. So all right. So now we have a portion of our budget set aside for our mortgage or our rent. We have a portion set aside for savings. One thing we should not overlook, of course, is that every company, not all companies, but a lot of companies today are offering 401k, 403bs. So tell us a little bit about that. What does that mean to a novice investor? Should I buy into this? Should I even bother with it, or am I better off doing it on my own?
So the first reason you would want to start with your employer-based plan is that if there is a match or a contribution, you want to be able to get that. And especially in the case of a match, if you're not participating in the plan, then you're essentially leaving part of your salary on the table because you might get anywhere from 3 to 6% in that match. So you definitely want to start with your employer based plan because it's additional salary. The other component of it, which is valuable, is it's tax advantaged. So that money is going to be money that is an above the line deduction for you now. You're not going to pay income tax on it in the current year. You'll pay taxes when you withdraw it many decades from now in retirement. So you're going to have some immediate tax savings in addition to the extra compensation from the match, if there is one. And then the only negative thing I would ever say about an employer based retirement plan is to make sure that you have well diversified funds within it. Because if you're overly weighted in your own company's stock, then you're at risk. You have a diversification risk that if anything goes bad at your one company, your whole portfolio has significantly decreased.
And that's especially for the people who work in larger for-profit companies where there's profit sharing or options available as part of your salary. There comes at an enormous risk. Right? So always be aware. And again, I would highly recommend using a financial planner to help you really understand what your salary, your base, and then your let's say they call the package, the options of preferred stock options, what that actually is valued at, to get an understanding of am I making the right move into the for-profit world away from maybe a non-for-profit entity itself. All right, so again, the message here is clear: buy into the 401k, 403b. If for nothing else, get the matching funds because that's the easiest money you will ever get. It is tax sheltered. You're protected. You won't have access to it without penalty until you're 59 and a half. But it certainly will compound over time if you do an S&P 500 index fund or similar to that, 8.8%. Every 7 years you will double the money that goes into it, and that's where the magic of compound interest takes place. That if you start at 25, there's no reason why you cannot have a million and a half in those accounts by the time you're ready to retire at 62, 63 years old. So solid advice. So now the next thing is we need to protect ourselves. And protecting ourselves is to think about insurance. Now, most of us work full time, get insurance through our employer, and there's very little we can do about that other than maybe having what it's called an FSA account, a savings account, a health savings account, so you can again avoid paying taxes. But not everybody has that, so I won't spend too much time on that. But what about health of life insurance? So we really have two options. We can go the route of having a whole life insurance policy versus a term life insurance policy. Tell us a little bit about what your thoughts are on that.
So, as a rule of thumb, most people are going to benefit more from a term than a whole life policy. Whole life insurance has higher premiums, lower death benefits. There are uses for whole life insurance in estate planning and in business succession. There's a variety of reasons why a whole life policy can have some value there. But for most working people, term life is better because the premiums are much lower, because chances are they won't die. And they want the higher amount of death benefit to replace the lost earnings. And that's really important if you have a family or dependents who rely upon your salary. So, one way you can look at it is you can look at what your total earnings are expected to be during the duration of the policy or your working years and go out and buy that much insurance. Or you can do it based on what you think the needs would be if you were to, excuse me, were to suddenly die. And then the other factor in there too is there's some social security planning, especially for married individuals with children, that there's some benefits, survivors benefits there as well. But term life insurance tends to be very affordable, relatively speaking. Some people don't like the idea of, they feel like they're betting on their own death, but it's something that if you have loved ones you're leaving behind, you want to make sure that they're going to be financially taken care of. So it is a good investment to have a good term life policy for most working people.
Yeah, and today you can get a term life policy for 25, 30 years, so you really don't have to at a steady pace. Now, something I was taught early on too is that for the non-disciplined investor, A whole life insurance policy might make a whole lot more sense. For the simple fact is that yes, you pay more for less, but when it reaches maturity in 10 years, there's a set money value to that continues to grow without having to contribute any more to that. Now, of course, the person who is a little bit more savvy, if you spend less on term life insurance, let's say $25 versus $75, you take the differential of the $50 between the term and whole life insurance policy, you put it into an S&P 500 or maybe a small cap fund, but slightly more aggressive. You can easily beat the whole life insurance policy by 5 times over. But it requires your discipline, right? If you have no discipline, and I'm spending $25 on my term and the other $50 I spend at McDonald's eating, you're not going to get that benefit, right? You have the security that if you pass away, that there's money there for your family, hopefully to live on, right? And the golden rule that I always use is that it is 6 times your annual salary. It should be your bare minimum of your term life insurance policy that you should have in order to be able to. And people have said different things, right? Take your mortgage, take this, take that, but 6 times your annual salary should be able to give enough time for your family to get back on their feet and be able to get through the difficult years if you happen to pass prematurely. So really really good topic. Now, of course, we have talked about all the serious stuff in the budget, but now the fun stuff in the budget, right? What should I do for vacations? How do I, can I afford to go on a vacation? How do I pay for a vacation without having to go into my credit card and having to spend that 28% on whatever I spend on vacation? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's going to all go back to your budget. If you have a line item in your budget for how much you're going to spend on the vacation and your budget balances out, then yeah, you can take that vacation without using the credit card. And in my experience, the vacation you take, which doesn't put you in debt, tends to be a lot more enjoyable than the one when you have debt hanging over your shoulders the whole time.
No doubt about that. And I think it is exactly what you're saying is that on your budget, there needs to be a line item for fun.
Yes.
So we call it entertainment, and entertainment you can really divide into 3 or 4 factors, right? Eating out, eating in, not home cooked, but eating in. Both come at a higher expense than cooking yourself. You can go to entertainment or go on vacations. Those things, if you want to do them in a responsible way, you need to have budget, line items set up for that. So I'll give you, what I do is I take X amount of dollars out of every check that I get, goes automatically into what I call my betterment account, which is an account that is double the rate of a typical savings account or better. It takes me 2 or 3 days to get access to it. So it is just far enough, but still close enough that I have access to it. And I don't have to sweat it, right? It is that it accumulates over time. And then when I want to go on vacation, I can use my card knowing that I can pay for it when I get back, right? So I can both get the mileage and the benefits of using a credit card, but I also know that I can pay it off at the end of the day. So that's really good. All right, so we've covered a whole bunch of topics here that I think are all very relevant. It really comes back down to the simple basic need that every household should have a budget. And keep it simple, stupid, right? Get it on a piece of paper and get yourself into the mode to do this. And I think your gym analogy, and I often use it as a primary example on how bad we are at behaving well. This is something that initially you should do often, meaning that you measure on a day-to-day basis. Now, Rocket Mortgage, I believe, just came out with a fantastic app that you can link it to your bank account, and it will keep track of all the spending you do on a day-to-day basis, and even make suggestions to you where you can have cost-cutting measures, or subscriptions that you've been paying for that you have not been using. So again, there are tools out there that you can use in order to come up with some really key savings. Right, $20 a month is still $240 a year, right? And if you do that for fines, that's $1,000. For $1,000, I can probably go on vacation and have a good time doing something rather than just having it go to waste. And that is really, really a shame. All right, in the closing moments, because I try to wrap it up, usually at 30, 40 minutes at the best. We're already at 30 minutes now. Any suggestions, any comments, anything that we have left out that you feel strongly about that we should share with our audience today?
Oh, I think this covered it well. The only other tip I would offer as a tool to assist with the budget process, sometimes even though credit cards, if you pay them off in full, you have the benefits of the reward programs, and it makes a lot of sense. For some people, they struggle to attach the money to the swipe or the money to the insertion of the card or the tap of the card. So if you're really struggling with sticking to your budget, try going to a cash method where you carry the amount of cash in your wallet, and that way you see yourself actually spending the money and you're aware of as the money's running down from the original amount. That can be something that's good for people who are struggling on the credit card front to stick better to their budget.
Okay. Well, I'll give you one piece of advice I got from my mother a long time ago. Never go to the store hungry. When you go to the grocery store, and we all know how expensive that is today. You know, we spend easily $300-400 a week on food in the grocery store. Uh, it is if you go there hungry, you buy things you don't need. And that is really often the difference between meeting your budget and not meeting your budget. Buying what you need versus what you want. And it is stay focused, make a list, right? Write down what it is that you really need, so you can be more resistant to picking up all the wants. Learning to say no to our children, which is a very difficult task, is something that we need to become practiced at, right? So the last topic I wanted to talk about, so we talked about the household budget here, and it's all wrapped up. There's one thing that left off we did not talk about, but I highly recommend to everybody to buy on the first day of the birth of a child. That is 529 account.
Mhm.
Any insight on any opinion on that?
So the 529 account is a great vehicle for saving for higher education. Some states offer a state tax deduction based on how much you fund it. You want to be aware of what that is for your state, because there is such a thing as overfunding the 529, because at the end of uh, the money can only be used for higher education. So if your own children don't need the money, you could be waiting around for grandchildren or fund somebody else's education. But there are cases where people wind up overfunding it. So it's a great tool to use. Make sure you fund it under the level of your state tax deduction for funding it. But it is a great vehicle to help pay for higher education. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think you can, I like to, if you have kids who are likely going to school, overfunding is unlikely to happen, but not doing it is a failure on part of the parent, right? It is that to come up with $50,000 a year for 4 years, even if you get some FAFSA money and other discounts, even $25,000 for the next 4 years or $100,000 is a lot. And if you need to go out and get to borrow that money today, the interest rates on even simple loans at Wells Fargo is at 8.5%. That's difficult to pay off, right? Would you spend $100,000 in actual cost, you spend another $75,000 interest charges over 20 years in order to pay that off, knowing that your bachelor's degree now costs you $175,000. If you can defer some of that by being semi-aggressive on your 529 account, and at least have that 50, 60, $70,000 there for a child by the time they go to school, it will help you tremendously. So, Sean, we need to have this conversation again. I think it is very, very important. Again, the pillars that I'm most concerned with when I work with the clients is your mental wellness, your spiritual wellness, your physical wellness, relationship wellness, and financial wellness. So I think we have had two conversations now that hopefully the people can take away. And again, the listeners now or in the future, I hope you stuck it out to the end, because it is important to take this really serious. That for every dollar you don't invest today, in 5 years or 10 years, you need to invest four, and then eight, and then 16. So start early. Teach your children coming out of school, as soon as they go into the workforce, about the ways to maintain a simple budget in the household, to try to focus on their needs, not their wants, and try not and really prevent them from getting abusing credit cards. Because so many people are set back and so many stresses are caused, so many divorces have been caused by financial distress, that a lot of this is avoidable. And listen, we all had to learn the hard way ourselves, right? We have all made these mistakes. We just have been fortunate enough to be able to work our way out of it. So now it is our turn to share this message forward. So, Sean, any closing words before we call the call it a good deal for today?
I'd just like to thank you once again for having me on the program to talk with you. It's always a pleasure. So thank you.
Thank you, Sean. And you can find this information on my website at thedutchmentor.com. And just quick, if you are interested in this topic or many others, you can find me on the YouTube channel. You can follow me on daily on LinkedIn, Instagram, and TikTok for daily tips about leadership. And we certainly talk about finance and many other topics. Just this little nugget of information per day that you can take away to continue to grow and develop. If you're interested as an emerging leader or an executive leader, to join our programs. We offer 6-month long engagements that really will help you get to the root of your why, your what, your how, to really adjust your habits and behaviors to become a highly effective leader. And it starts by raising self-awareness around these 5 topics. It's about really meeting the commitment of self-development and then learning to solve problems or root causes. And then, of course, how can I use these newly developed skills, habits, and behaviors in a team environment to set my team on fire and really hit the ball out of the park. So again, thank you, Sean, for joining me today. Thank you, everybody, for having listened, and hopefully you'll take that one thing away that was going to make a big difference in your life. If you have any questions, follow it up by an email to info@thedutchmentor.com, or certainly look me up on LinkedIn and make the connection. We're always here for you. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you, and take care.